we are going to talk about so many Greek New Testaments, which one to buy and read. And this is a question that I usually get asked by beginning or intermediate students. They say, hey, I'm finally ready to buy my Greek New Testament, and which one do I need to buy? And it's a confusing question in the day that we live in. I'm going to compare it a little bit, though, to someone who says, I don't know what running shoes to get. If I could just get some running shoes, then I could begin my exercise program. Well, this is a little bit of a avoidance or fallacy that we're dealing with here, because the reality is the Greek New Testament you already have in print or in digital format, one we can pull up on the internet right now in 5 seconds, is sufficient. The best Greek New Testament is the one you will actually read, okay? So I really feel like the biggest, don't worry, this is not like a bait and switch. I am actually going to talk about versions of the Greek New Testament. I'm getting to that. But I do want to say, it has never been easier to either learn Greek or to revive Greek. And so we have no excuse. But it usually has nothing to do with the Greek New Testament that we own. It has to do with habits. It has to do with the way we order our life. It has to do with self-discipline. It has to do with choices we make, with our desires and passions that are expressed in our choices. Just a note of encouragement. I printed this off right before I came here. I got this email from a gentleman whose career is in the construction business. He has 6 children. He said one of them with cancer. And he preaches once a month in his local church. So he's a busy guy with a lot going on. And he says that he's worked through all the video lectures online, Daily Dose. He says, and since that time, I've expanded my vocabulary to about 75% of the New Testament. I can read from the Greek New Testament and parse with little aid. He said, I've finally come to the place after 3 years that seemed impossible at first. I can't believe I can finally sit down with my Greek New Testament and just read it and understand it. So that's just to encourage you with that story. That's a story that can be your story too. It's just a matter of being faithful with what the Lord's given us and continuing on that journey. 2 years ago, when we had a conference similar to this, I talked a lot about practical advice on that. Here's how we create incentives and disincentives, and here's how what neuroscience says about distraction and habits, and we went all into that, and it was really fun. People got all fired up. Well, we have all of that basically packaged in this book, okay? So this is like your personal trainer for Greek, and it just like if you have trouble exercising, I don't know where to start, people pay a personal trainer to give them advice and help them, and that's basically what this little paperback book does. So I just commend it to you. It's a little embarrassing to commend it because I co-wrote it, but it's my passion, my desire in that book, and I hope it will be helpful to you. But that's not what we're here today about. We're here to talk about which Greek New Testament to buy. And which one's best? Which one should I use? And I'm going to begin with what I'll call a zero-based budgeting approach to book acquisition. Anyone in here in business and knows what zero-based budgeting is, right? It's where I was in a church where we did this. You bring someone in and they say, imagine we start from zero. We don't have, a minister to this and a minister to that. We don't have all these positions already. We start with building from the grounds. What position would you actually create, and what has kind of grown in and is, maybe you really don't need. And so this is complicated because if someone comes to me and they say, hey, I have a UBS 4 Greek New Testament, I'm not going to say, well, buy a UBS 5. I'm going to be like, that's good. Here's explain the differences and things. But let's imagine that we're starting at ground zero. We don't have any Greek books at all. What Greek New Testament should I buy? And I'm going to talk about ones that I wouldn't necessarily put on the top of the list either and why, but we'll start with this. So if you're going to buy a Greek New Testament, you don't have one at all, I really would recommend, number one, is the United Bible Society 5th edition. Now, why should, and this one is with a dictionary. You can get it with a dictionary or without a dictionary. Why would I recommend this? Well, on the cover it says it's the standard edition. So there we go. No, the standard edition for translators and students. No, but it really is. It really is. Okay, so it's produced ultimately by the Institute for New Testament Textual Criticism based out of Münster, Germany, which dates back to 1959, and the roots of that go far deeper, back into scholars decades and even centuries earlier. So this is kind of, this is the standard, critical, scholarly edition, thousands of hours, hundreds of scholars over the years and their assistants and so on having worked on this edition. If we can make a comparison to this, it'd be like, this is the standard of the sort of imperial weights and measures for New Testament studies. I mean, this is the mile, the yard. Pardon me if you're from other countries, but in America, this is the mile, the yard, the foot, right? This has come to be viewed, rightly or wrongly. I think it's an excellent work as the standard. It's also, let's just be very clear, it's an eclectic text. I think most people know this, but just to be extremely clear, looking at nearly 6,000 Greek ancient manuscripts or portions of manuscripts, looking at the church fathers, looking at early translations, looking at all these materials and assessing and saying, what was the original reading? What did the apostles originally write in the autographs? And comparing those different manuscripts and translations and church liturgical materials, and then saying, here in this text, we're making our judgments about what was originally written, right? That's an eclectic text, gathering all that together, and it's been the subject of decades of scholarly scrutiny and discussion. So, I mean, it's really hard to say any other one should be on the top of the list. Don't worry, we're going to keep talking about it here. And I love digital Bibles. I have 1 million of them in different programs and Logos and BibleWorks and other things and Bible Arc. But I do think it's great to have a print copy because of the distraction of the internet and because we jump from thing to thing. It's nice to actually have a print copy. And I think there's science that shows that actually having palpable things in front of us that we touch and that the text stays and our memory is spatial, that having sections of the page that we come back to and the text is in the same place actually helps us to learn it. Someone in here is wondering, well, what about, how's this different from the Nestle Lot 28? How do I know whether I should get one or the other? Well, you notice one of them has a red cover and one of them has a blue cover, and depending on what state you're from, right? Depending on what state you're from, no, that's not what that is. But if you're from another country and you don't get that joke, ask an American later about it. But so the actual text of the Nestle Aland and the UBS 5 is all the words are the same. They've been the same. These groups, these two publications have been working together since the 70s, since the UBS 3 and the Nestle Aland 2026. So since the 1970s, the UBS and the Nestle Aland has had the same text. Where it differs is in punctuation, capitalization, things like that. The major difference is in how the textual variants are presented. And the reason I'm recommending the UBS is I think that for most people in here, for most pastors, educated Christians, the way that the UBS presents the textual variants is much more understandable and helpful. And so at the bottom of the page, I don't know that the resolution is going to come through very clearly here, but at the bottom of the page, they just cover the 1, 2, or 3 main variants in that page of text that really are contenders, that are important or there's some debate about them. And then it gives you a very helpful rating, A, B, C, or D, based on how confident the committee is that that's the original reading. Everyone immediately understands that. A, they're really sure. B, there's more debate. C, more uncertain. D, they didn't know. They flipped a coin, right? Or maybe not that bad. But this is different from the Nestle Aland, which we'll see a picture of that in just a moment. But it has this little abbreviation system, circles, dots, little lines, about 10 or 12 abbreviations. And then it likes to give tons of information at the bottom on many, many variants that no one even thinks are original. It's kind of instructive as to what kind of mistakes scribes made and the errors they made. But for most people, they're not interested in studying scribal habits. They just want to know, they say, I want to know what the apostles wrote. I want to have a confidence that I'm reading the words they wrote. And if there are debates in the textual tradition, I'd like to be made aware of those in a simple and clear way. And the United Bible Society text does that. It's also helpful, the UBS text, UBS 5, has a textual commentary published with it. I should note as well, I mean, if you Google Nestle Aland 28 free online, the text of the NA28, which is the same as the UBS except for punctuation, you can pull it up and view the entire text free digitally, right? Now, it doesn't have the information on textual variants, but there it is, free online. But I still am saying it's nice to have a print copy of the New Testament on your shelf, on your desk, something you can look at and something that will help you remember spatially text as you work through it. The textual commentary of the Greek New Testament, there needs to be a new edition of it. The cover usually matches the red UBS cover. And basically what it is it goes through all the major variants, and it just has a little paragraph discussing how the committee made its decision. Extremely helpful. You know, we were looking at this and wonder that it seems the author, many manuscripts have this mistake or whatever. It's just really clear. It's written in understandable language to the educated lay Christian. Of course, as you get into this, there's some technicality about the way manuscripts are listed and so on, but you can follow the base argument even if you don't know what all the abbreviations for manuscripts are. Okay, now this contrasts with the Nestle Aland. As I mentioned, this is just a shot of the Nestle Aland here where we have the text, and I don't know if you're able to see this, but it has little bitty markings in the text, circles, squares, whatever, that are a really abbreviated, efficient way of being able to say something was left out here, something is added in some manuscripts here, something is transposed here, and then you have the additional information listed at the bottom. Give a little shout out for David Hutchison. Does anyone go to Southwestern Seminary? I think I met someone, yes. So David Hutchison is a professor at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he did several Saturday features explaining how to read the textual apparatus both for the Nestle Aland and for the UBS. So if you search on like textual apparatus or Hutchison on the Daily Dose search bar, you can pull up those old videos, and he's very clear and understandable. So you're probably disappointed because I keep saying this, but I'm going to be very clear. There it is, UBS 5, that's on my top of the list. I'm going to recommend 2 sort of zero-based budgeting. Someone's like, I don't have any Greek New Testament. Buy the UBS 5. And I'll be very clear, like there's no kickbacks or anything here. I'm not getting any free editions. I'm just being honest with you. This is what you would buy. This is the standard, right? And then the second one I would purchase, I think I can say that confidently. The second one, I did get a free copy of this, but the second one I would, and I bought you a bunch of copies of the other ones, but is the Tyndale House edition of the Greek New Testament. When this was first being kind of talked about, it's going to come out a year or two ago, they abbreviated it the THE, Tyndale House edition, Greek New Testament, which if you think about that, that's the Greek New Testament. Maybe they felt that was a little presumptuous, so they took out the E. Now it's the GNT, right? THGNT is how they're billing that. And I'll go through some reasons why I think this is a nice complement. I think the Reader's Edition is nice. There's some things I wish were different in the Reader's Edition. But it's really great too, and for you it was free. So, hey, that's awesome. You've got half of your zero-based budgeting goals already met. I received this last week an email from Dirk Jonkind. He's one of the main editors of this work, of the Tyndale House. He's been working on the Tyndale House edition for 10 years. He came and spoke at our seminary last summer. And at the time, we got to hang out a little bit. We went to go eat at Blue Dog one morning for breakfast. And I just really resonated with the man's love for the Lord. He loves the Lord. He's extremely knowledgeable. I mean, he worked for the British Museum, like helping curate the Codex Sinaiticus. I mean, his academic credentials are off the charts, but he loves Jesus. And we sat across from each other, and he said, "My vision." He has a better accent than I have, but he's like, "My vision for 1 million more people to read their Greek New Testaments." I was like, I love that vision. Let's work together. Let's have 1 million more people reading the Word of God in the original language and being ignited with a passion for the Word of God and being filled with the Spirit and changing their churches and their communities because they have they're tasting afresh the love of God and His Word. But I got an email from him that they're coming out with a little 60-page paperback introduction, like, hey, here's more information about the Tyndale, why we did it, why it's not this way, why it's different from this. Very helpful. It's too bad it couldn't have come out at the same time, but it's not that much later. And so he asked me to write a little blurb on it, and because I had to do this for that anyway, I brought it in here, and I think it will illustrate to you some of the reasons I like the Tyndale and some of the reasons I still have some questions. So this is my little endorsement of that 60-page book. The editors of the Tyndale House edition of the Greek New Testament, the G&T, I don't know if that's going to stick, but that's what they're using now, claim that they have produced the most accurate edition of the Greek New Testament published so far. That's a bold claim, okay? And that's in quotes because that's what he said. With accuracy defined by faithfulness in representing the apostolic autographs. This is a bold declaration. And senior editor Dirk Jonken does much to back up this assertion in his new 60-page introduction to the G&T. The book is addressed to the educated non-specialist and is precise, irenic, right? He's not fighting, he's peaceful, lucid, clear writing. He's writing very clearly. Only time, this is important. This is true. This is why this is certainly not, it would be irresponsible to recommend this as your first G&T purchase. I'll just be honest. Like, you know, sometimes people get all fired up promos, but that would not be responsible of me to do that. Only time and broader scholarly scrutiny will adjudicate the claims of the editors of the G&T, right? There's not been enough time. There's not been enough really sifting. It's some different approaches we're going to talk about that haven't been fully publicly discussed in a scholarly way that's adjudicated them. Nevertheless, I say, even in the early days of its public appearance, the G&T should be celebrated by all as a magnificent achievement. I heartily encourage my students to read the G&T, and this book he's written, an introduction, is an invaluable companion to that joyful enterprise. So in their own words, why are they producing this volume? So we're going to read one more long quote, and then we'll, don't worry, we're not just reading long quotes the whole time. That would get boring for me and for you. But in their own words, the editors of the Tyndale House edition of the Greek New Testament, this is what they say. Since 1975, significant advances have been made in our knowledge of the text of the Greek New Testament. This has included the discovery of further primary material, additional early papyri, improvements in the accuracy with which we can use early versions, and careful study of scribal habits. Setting aside for a second, stepping aside on scribal habits, Dirk Jonken did his doctoral dissertation on scribal habits. And what this is, I think he studied it in Sinaiticus, and Sinaiticus has multiple scribes that worked on it, but he's able to say, you know, we can see how, we can see these patterns there's certain patterns of errors or mistakes that people make, that individual scribes, you can kind of say, oh, this scribe has this tendency, has a tendency to drop the article. And that's not something that's been studied with that level of detail in the past. And so it allows you to analyze manuscripts really more carefully in that way. I mean, that's a significant issue. And he's saying, hey, that's important that that be done in determining a critical edition of the Greek New Testament. We need to bring these insights about scribal habits rather than just kind of shooting from the hip, you know, in terms of, well, here's what scribes often do. Let's have an objective and informed knowledge of individual manuscripts that we're working with. He says existing Greek New Testaments have generally not been updated in light of this accumulated knowledge. Final long quote here. This continues from the Tyndale House people. And I love this because there's a reverence here. The Greek New Testament is the very Word of God. It is so unspeakably precious that even the smallest details deserve careful attention. The Greek New Testament produced at Tyndale House, Cambridge, aims to be the most accurate possible printing of the New Testament in its earliest well-documented form. You're not going to have the United Bible Society say that, or the Nestle Aland, really. It's produced ultimately by a very scholarly institute in Germany. It's off in the city of Münster. It's certainly, as you go back, and even now, there are reverent and people who love Jesus who are working on that. But it's a little bit more of an objective scholarly enterprise, and I'm sure there are many people who've worked on it who are not believers at all. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. When I was having heart surgery a year ago, I wanted to know that my heart surgeon was really good. And if he was a believer, that's great too. But I want to know he knew what he was doing. And when you're working with ancient manuscripts, you want to know someone can read ancient manuscripts and they have great knowledge and they can objectively weigh that critique. You know, there's skills involved, paleography and this that you want people to have. But I love the fact that someone has those skills and they also have a reverence for the Word of God. That's a beautiful thing. Let's talk more about what's distinctive about this Tyndale House edition. Well, it relies on manuscripts that are it relies on only Greek manuscripts. Okay, so it doesn't look at early translations. Now, this could be a potential criticism, right? Personally, I'm a bit surprised by it. One of the guys who worked on it is known for his work on Syriac variants in the New Testament. But it only looks at Greek manuscripts and mostly from the 5th century and earlier. So we're talking about from the 400s and earlier. That's really what this Greek New Testament is interested in representing. They had a rule that every reading, like any place you go in their Greek New Testament, if I put my finger down, I'm like, okay, here's this reading, here's a sentence. That those words there have to be represented in at least 2 Greek manuscripts, at least 2 explicit manuscripts. I can bring these ancient manuscripts and show you. And at least one of those, at least one has to be from the 5th century or earlier. Okay. Now, maybe sometimes they have many, but at least that's the rule. And the only place they deviated from that is in the book of Revelation, where the early evidence for it in Greek is not as great. You don't have as many manuscripts and things like that. There's a very concise textual apparatus in the non-reader editions. That's one of my criticisms of the reader editions. I was surprised they didn't have their textual apparatus in there. I was a little disappointed by that because one of the unique features of the Tyndale House edition is they're saying we are bringing to the table a new critical edition of the Greek New Testament. We're not just reacting to the NAS, to the Nestle Aland 20. We're not just reacting to that. We're not trying to find some sneaky way to publish it without copyright violation, right? We are actually producing a new critical edition of the Greek New Testament that's looking at things slightly differently. And so because that textual issues are so to the fore on this, I was a little disappointed that they're not listed in the bottom of your reader, but they are listed in the non-reader edition, and there's a commitment of Tyndale House and Crossway and others. This is a global project for the global church, and I think everything will eventually be available free online if it's not already. They have a website, The Greek New Testament, thegreeknewtestament.com. I bet they had to buy that from someone, don't you? I mean, someone had to have that web domain already, but that's a great web domain, and so even if we don't have the textual apparatus and what we gave you, I'm confident it is or will be available eventually online. The order of the books, I don't know if you looked at this yet, but did you notice, don't worry, you're not going senile. Okay, you're like, I thought I could find Romans, but where is it? Well, if you look in the front, of course the titles are in Greek, but after the Acts of the Apostles is the book of James, right? And then 1st and 2nd Peter, and then 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and then Jude. And then we begin with Romans, and it goes all the way through Paul's letters to Philemon, and then we have the book of Hebrews. And what we have here is the order that was much more common. This was the dominant order of the New Testament in the first 5 centuries. Now, there were variations. Hebrews was sometimes found in other places, but, I mean, the general or Catholic epistles were usually, or more commonly, found before the Pauline letters. So that's I like that. That's like, it makes me feel closer to the ancient Christians and the conventions that they had. Also, it's a small thing, but you'll notice every book begins with the title. Every book of the New Testament begins by listing the title, and then it ends by listing the title, just as the dominant ancient manuscripts like Codex Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, they do that as well. So it tries to reflect more specifically, accurately, clearly, the conventions of the most ancient traditions. It retains early spelling variations. Okay, so this is not something I realized until a few months ago, that a lot of the spelling has been standardized in our Greek New Testaments in a way that's not reflected in the first centuries of the manuscript tradition. And so, for example, the adversative word Allah, the word for but or however, they just standardized, if it's followed by a vowel, we'll drop the alpha and it'll become al, even if no manuscript says that. So they say, no. We should reflect the actual manuscript tradition. If they wrote out the word Allah, then we should write out the word Allah. We shouldn't immediately just standardize that with an apostrophe. In many of the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament, the word genomai is spelled gainomai. Not in all the books, but in certain books. And apparently, this is something, again, I've just learned in the last few months, of course, you know the letter Yoda. If you know Greek, the letter Yoda can be short or long. And so in the first few centuries, sometimes people would write it with the diphthong epsilon Yoda to show unambiguously it was long. Okay, so that was a way of writing the long vowel unambiguously. Same thing with gnosko. It's many forms of it are spelled in the Tyndale House edition gnosko. And you're like, well, that's weird. That's not what I learned as a vocabulary word. Yeah, but when you look at the first few centuries of the Greek New Testament, you say, well, that's really the dominant way that word is spelled in Acts. Then they say we want to be bound by that, because ultimately, if you read carefully, they think that probably reflects Luke's spelling. That's why they're using it. They think that the early transmission argues in favor of that. And I was trying to think of some analogy to this. It's a little bit of a higher, what we might call a higher register language too. It's like if you need to bring your kids back a present from your trip, some of you, right? So you're driving down the street here and you see, so it says toy shop, T-O-Y-S-H-O-P. You think, oh, there's toys in there. You see another one that says toy shop, S-H-O-P-P-E, and you think, I probably can't afford the stuff in there. Right? Because that spelling is a sort of a register issue of letting you know it's a little bit highfalutin language, right? And so we might say that this spelling variation is a little bit analogous to that. It's not a power issue or a wealth issue, but it's an alternate way of spelling that may reflect a higher education or higher social status. Some other things about the Tyndale House edition that's very interesting. The paragraph designations follow early manuscripts. The earliest manuscripts we have, there's no paragraphs, no word divisions, no accents, no periods, no commas, nothing, right? You've seen these before where it's just a sea of words, right? But if we go on all the way up to the 5th century, to the 400s, well, sure, we do have quite a few manuscripts that have some level of division, and it's text, we call it text segmentation or paragraph divisions. And if you have yours here, you look and you'll see these little sections, and the first word in each section goes out into the margin. So it's not indented, it's outdented, okay? It sticks out. And that reflects the pattern that's found, like that specific pattern of having it stick out like that, and the actual length of the division of the paragraphs, the segmentation, is reflective of manuscripts from the first 5 centuries. Some of them, obviously some of them don't have any segmentation, and some of them have slightly different segmentation. And the technical term for this, I just learned this word. I didn't know it before. Ekthesis. Ekthesis. And it comes from the word ektithemi. So I was unfamiliar with the term, but ekthesis, let's look at it. Ekthesis refers to segmenting text by sticking the first word out, sticking it out rather than indenting it. And it comes from the Greek word ektithemi. It's actually a transliteration of a Greek noun, ekthesis. And ekthesis means to lay out or to stick out, and it comes from the Greek word ektithemi. You know the word tithemi, to put or place. So ektithemi is to place out or to lay out. It's used 4 times in the book of Acts, ektithemi. And 3 of those times it's like translated lay out in the sense of expound. They were laying out the gospel. They were expounding the gospel, expounding the gospel. And then one time it's used very literally, where Moses in Acts 7, Stephen says that Moses was laid out. He was put out, and then Pharaoh's daughter found him. He was exposed, he was abandoned, he was put out of the house. And so you can see it's say this is a place where the text sticks out. The text is put out to mark a new section. So that's a different way of doing things, and it's interesting. Also, just as a matter of informing you where this is coming from, when they started working on this 10 years ago, they started with the 19th century work, we're talking about mid-1800s work, of Tregelles. Most of us don't know that name, but he was another, like Nestle or like Westcott and Hort. He was an early text critic who did careful, detailed study, and he had a critical text. So they started with that, and then they applied text critical principles throughout and made many, many changes to that. Main guy who worked on it for the last 10 years is Dirk Jonken, Dr. Dirk Jonken. I mentioned him. I think he's originally Dutch, but he did his PhD in England, but that name is Dutch. Then Peter Williams, who's at Tyndale House, and maybe about a dozen other people worked on it too, and roughly, from what I can gather, reading online and things like that. So, what are my hesitations with that somewhat? Well, one thing I'd say is, well, if you're really trying to reflect the earliest manuscripts, if that's your passion, to reflect the earliest manuscripts, why do we even have verse numbers in there? Those were added in 1551. Chapter divisions in the New Testament were added in the early 13th century. Why do we use lowercase letters? I mean, all the manuscripts from the 1st to the 5th century are uppercase letters. Also, the majority of these manuscripts that you're using use the nomina sacra. So when they write the name Jesus, it's a iota and a sigma with a line over it. Theos is a theta and a sigma with a line over it. So that is reflective of some of the earliest text tradition, but it's not reflected in this text. Now they have some answers to that, but I'm just raising those questions. Also, a question I would raise is it really valid to not consider the early versions? We have early Syriac translations, Ethiopic, early Latin that are very early and reflective of a translation from a Greek. So should we really not consider those? Quotations from the church fathers, those are not considered. And see, in the UBS or the Nestle Aland, those are considered, or they're at least listed. What the Tyndale House people say is, we've looked, or I don't know if they say we've looked at all those, but when we look at those, they don't in any way change the judgment we would make from the known Greek manuscripts that we have. They're like, hey, we're about representing the earliest version of the Greek manuscripts that we have because we think that's closest to what the apostles actually wrote. So we're about representing the Greek. And again, I think it's somewhat ironic because Peter Williams, if I'm not mistaken, he did his dissertation on Syriac variants in the New Testament. And what he did was very, very valuable and widely recognized, but now he's part of a project that doesn't look at any Syriac. So also, just again, I could have made this talk like a parade for the Tyndale House, but I'm just being honest with you about, I love it, it's great, but I'm just being honest with you about concerns. So I think someone could criticize and say, hey, it's a very small group that worked on this, and it was mainly you, Dr. Jonken. So that's like, it's kind of like, trust me, it's like, I feel better about this if there's a bigger committee, if there's more ecumenical, there's more like, and to their credit, they say, hey, we're coming out with a commentary on all our textual decisions. So just like the UBS has that textual commentary, Tyndale says we're coming out with it, but we don't have it yet, right? So this is we're kind of waiting for that. We're waiting for more discussion of it. We're waiting for some of these things to see how they play out. So comparing it to the imperial system of weights and measures versus the metric system, right? This is like the 1970s. So we don't know yet, do we, whether we're dealing with the U.S. or Europe. Right, so what could happen, right, is that the Tyndale House approach is adjudicated and it gradually becomes like if you go to Europe, the metric system, right? It's like this is the system. Or it's possible that this could end up more like the U.S., where you continue to have some people using this on the side. It's interesting, but still by far the dominant approach is the imperial system of weights and measures. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know, but yeah, we'll have to see. The reader's edition that you have, I really like it. What would make me like it more? If it had a textual apparatus in the bottom, if it had the 10-page introduction that's present in the non-reader's edition, like that explains some of this more. I don't know why they didn't include 10 pages. It's not that much money. Why didn't they include the 10-page introduction? Or at least I couldn't find it. And I can understand why they didn't do this, but I really would love to see where it differs from the Nestle Lot 28, right, and the UBS 5. But if they had put that in there, very quickly there'd be the NA 29 and the UBS 6, and so it's kind of outdated. And it's sort of admitting that you're sort of second class a little bit to, you're sort of putting this other critical edition as the standard and putting your work against that. And they don't want to just be another NA. They want to stand on their own, and rightly so. But my impression when I first got this, I read a few chapters of it. The main thing that I noticed was the spelling differences, right? Gainomai, Gainosko. I was like, just kind of weird, right? Because I'm not used to reading that. But that was really the only thing that stood out to me. And on that, maybe two spellings a page or something where I was. It wasn't that big a deal. I did watch last night, just making sure I'm not missing anything. I watched Bill Mounce's little 10-minute review of this, and he goes through 1 Timothy and tries to show more significant differences from the NA28. And the only ones he lists are like, you have an active verb in the NA28, and you have a middle verb in the Tyndale, an active verb and a middle verb. So they seemed, again, not substantial, really. So but that's encouraging. It's like if we had a Greek New Testament that was really radically different, then we either would have been crazily deceived for the last long time, or these people would be nuts, right? So they need to be close, right? We expect them to be close because the evidence is so overwhelming and is plentiful, and there's so much agreement on what we're doing. So these are not radically different. Okay, I'm going to briefly talk about a few other options that people have, and sometimes they're not aware really what they have. So let's talk very quickly about what is the SBL GNT. Okay, this is the Society of Biblical Literature Greek New Testament. Oftentimes when someone's online or they're on an app and they're using the Greek New Testament, they don't know it, but they're using the SBL GNT. Someone has criticized it, suggested that it was created so that you could have a text that's really close to NA28 that's not bound by the copyright issues of the United Bible Society. So we could distribute it freely and digitally. Is that it? I said, well, we don't know the motives of the people, but it seems it functions like a free NA28, sort of. It's edited by Michael Holmes, very good scholar. Many of you may know his little Apostolic Fathers diglot that Baker publishes, where it has Greek on one side and English on the other. Very excellent scholar. What he does here is he takes 4 critical Greek texts, the Westcott and Hort, Tregelles, Goodrich, and I don't know if I can say this guy's name, Lukaszewski, maybe, I don't know, and then Robinson and Pierpoint. And he basically compares these different critical editions. NA28 is not listed there. And then he, based on their agreement and whatever, he comes up with this composite text. And it differs from the NA28 UBS 5 in more than 540 places. I think people using it often don't realize that it does. But it does have a textual apparatus people don't often use where it will show, I think it even lists where it differs from the NA28 in the textual apparatus, I believe. But the textual apparatus doesn't cite, as far as I know, ancient witnesses. It cites these sources that he used. So if you want to go back to those, then you have to figure out, so it's kind of a layer before you get to the ancient witnesses. This is the logo for it, and if nothing else, it shows we need a better branding department, don't we? It's the 1980s right here, okay. But maybe they don't care, I don't know. Pete Williams at Tyndale House, he said this about it. He said this long before the Tyndale House edition came out. If one wants to do any kind of critical work, one really isn't able to do so because we do not know what manuscripts lie behind this edition without consulting other editions. In fact, one has no easy way of knowing whether any manuscripts lie behind the edition. What he means there is like when it has a book title, is there any ancient manuscript that has the book title? So it sounds a little overstated. Now I'm going to read a really critical thing next by a famous text critic, so it's kind of strong. Okay. J.K. Elliott is a well-known text critic, works in New Testament textual criticism. He said, this SBL edition has no apparatus of manuscripts whatsoever, and there are only some 18 places where Holmes prints as the text or reading independent of and differing from his 4 base texts or their marginalia. No wonder outsiders could think New Testament textual criticism had nothing new to say if one of the leading professional biblical societies could sponsor and parade such an edition. So obviously he's not a big fan of it. I think as long as you know what it is, I think it's a good thing. It's fine to use it, right? It's very close to the Nestle, it's very close to the critical edition. I understand it doesn't list variants in the ways that might be most helpful. You're like, that's interesting. Maybe I'm reading the SBL. I don't know. If you do want to read it, it's available in BibleArc. That is the default Greek New Testament in BibleArc. But one reason I like BibleArc as well is that if you click on the verse of the SBL GNT, click on the number, it pulls up the verse of the NA28 also. So you can compare the NA28 and the SBL side by side. And that's all, BibleArc's all free. Mobile, web-based. It's a fantastic software program and app. And this week, is Jennifer here from my Greek review class? I don't see her. I always thought you can only view the NA28 one verse at a time. She's like, no, you can't. There's a way to view up to 50 verses at a time. I was like, wow, really? So here's how you do it. So the first option is just to click on a verse in the SBL. You're like, okay. But then if you want to load up to 50 verses at a time, and then again you click on words and parses them and all that, you get a new tab, and you use a lookup, not read. You use the lookup function. And then it lets you add a passage, and you choose the version. You choose NA28, and it will let you add up to 50 continuous verses of the NA28, okay, for free. So that's nice. I didn't know you could do that, but now I do. Okay, so that's the SBL, Greek New Testament. 540 differences from the NA28. I did email Dirk Jonken last night, which is too close to expect a response, and said, you know, I'm presenting on this tomorrow. I just wish I could find how many differences are there between the Tyndale and the NA28, but I checked right before I got up, and I don't know yet. So, and I think that number would be a little bit distorted, because if we count all those spelling variations as differences, that sounds huge. But if you just count like, you know, middle versus active, ending, even that's very minor. So, yeah, it would be interesting if we could get those statistics. I searched for it online. I couldn't find it. Does anyone know that? I couldn't find any evidence. So it would be interesting to get it presented in a way that's clear, like this many are minor spelling variations, this many are more significant. Okay, we have to talk about the Zondervan Reader's Greek New Testament, which I've recommended many times. I have a copy. Look, it's worn. So sad. A couple of months ago, I had it in my trunk, and I helped my wife by running an errand to Costco. And I got that big package of chicken breasts. You know, it's like 6 chicken breasts in there. And then when I got home, the package was leaking. And it leaked raw chicken juice all over my Greek New Testament. Talk about spiritual warfare. So it was so sad. And then I got these bleach wipes, and I put it outside. And then it rained on it. Oh, it was horrible. So sad. But, oh well. But it dried pretty well. So this is now in its 3rd edition, and this is the Greek text that's mentioned, that's one of the base texts used by Holmes in the SBL GNT, edited by Goodrich and Lucas Zuski. And I'm sorry, I don't know how to say his last name. But basically, Zondervan says the Greek text of this reader is the Greek text that underlies the NIV. Okay, what that means is when the NIV, the Committee on Bible Translation, all got together over many years and all this, as they worked through the NA28 or whatever it was then, the NA26 was the critical text for them, but they sometimes disagreed with it. They disagreed with it in 231 places. Sometimes that could just be not having the word and, like many of them are very minor, but this is the Greek text that's the basis for the NIV, and it disagrees with the critical Greek text, the UBS or the Nestle-Aland, in 231 places. And I think it's that number, as best I can determine, is compared to the NA27 and UBS 4. I don't think it's to the most current UBS 5 or NA28, which has a few changes there. So the most recent evidence I could find is this number. But it's a good, and it cites all those differences at the bottom, right? It gives the difference from the UBS or the Nestle-Aland very clearly. It says UBS reads here, UBS reads here. But it's a nice reader's edition. I like the reader's editions because students are encouraged. They can read rather quickly, right? It gives you rare vocabulary and parsing. So I'm a big fan of a reader's edition. So that's why my two recommendations, one of them is a reader's edition, and one of them is just the standard critical text with helpfully presented textual variant information. So we've talked about, just review, we've talked about the United Bible Society 5th edition is sort of my number one recommendation. Talked about how it was a little different from the Nestle-Aland. Then we said Tyndale House edition was reader's edition. I'm saying, hey, this is exciting. It's like fresh, it's new. It's Henry Ford's car. What's going to happen? Is it going to catch on? We don't know yet. But then I'm also telling most people, whether they know it or not, are using or have used an SBL Greek New Testament. Many people also have used or are familiar with the Zondervan. And I'm going to mention two other ones that I'm not really recommending that you buy or anything, but just so you're aware of them. There's Robinson and Pierpoint, right? This is the Byzantine, sort of a Byzantine Greek New Testament. If you believe the Byzantine text tradition is the most reliable, or perhaps you just have a scholarly interest in it. One of these guys, I don't think both of them, but one of them teaches at Southeastern, and I assume most people in here are familiar in the history of the Greek New Testament's transmission. It's traditionally been explained you have these different families. This has come under scrutiny recently, but you have the Alexandrian and the Caesarean and the Western and the Byzantine. And most people believe the Byzantine is later. It's not as early, and it's more of an edited, smoothed over versions. Many manuscripts are Byzantine. And so you can find early Byzantine readings, and those should be valued, but we can't assume it's the whole tradition is early. But there are other people who have, for whatever reasons, they have different reasons. And in this version, which you can get on Kindle for free, I believe, there is an extensive defense of the Byzantine text tradition by scholars who are intelligent and peaceable. If you want a non-intelligent, non-peaceable defense of the Byzantine text tradition, search for people who are adamant KJV only people, and that's what you're getting, right? The KJV onlyism is, if it's informed, is rooted in the idea, this philosophical, theological pre-commitment. If God preserved His Word, He had to preserve it sort of in a pure stream. And so the pure stream is the Byzantine text tradition. And so that's different from the eclectic view that God preserved His Word, every word of the apostles, but He did it through this symphony of witnesses across many different traditions. And so we should not see that as a problem, but as a beautiful symphony of chorus of agreement. And where they disagree, we have so many witnesses that will help us determine what's original. But I did want to mention, if you're interested in sort of a critical Byzantine text where people are actually, saying, yeah, there are variants, and we're listing those and things like that. One other final thing we'll make you aware of is the Editio Critica Maior, okay? You will not buy this because it's like $100 a volume, and there are only like 6 or 7 volumes out, so $700, and you don't even have half the New Testament yet. So you're not going to buy this, okay? But you need to be aware that group in Germany that's ultimately now behind the Nestle-Aland is producing this. It's the major critical edition, Editio Critica Maior, and it's supposed to be done by the year 2030. And it's coming out volume by volume, extremely detailed, looking at all the evidence in the first millennium First 1,000 years, fathers, citations, liturgical material, translations, Greek manuscripts, first 1,000 years. And they're making little minor differences to prior judgments. Often it's things like, is there a movable nu? Was there a chi there? You know, is this verb or this verb, a difference of one letter? So it's not radical differences, but they are reaching some different judgments. So they just came out a few years ago with the 2 volumes on the Catholic epistles. And in the Catholic epistles, the general epistles, there were 34 minor differences from the UBS 4. So that's why the UBS 5, that's the differences. The UBS 5 and the UBS and Nestle-Aland are gradually, edition by edition, incorporating the changes that are being made through the Editio Critica Maior. Okay? So what is out so far on the Editio Critica Maior is listed at the bottom of the page here, the Catholic epistles. There's a volume of parallel gospel pericopes, not periscopes. That's what you call autocorrect it doesn't have theological vocabulary in it. Sorry about that. And the book of Acts, right? The book of Acts was recently completed. So like a page of that, it looks like this. So if you look at the top line is the Greek text of the New Testament. They're like 15, 16 words. This is typical of every page. And then all the stuff underneath is this overwhelming manuscript evidence. Very translations, Syriac, all first 1,000 years of transmission. That's amazing. Can they finish all this by 2030? I wonder that myself. But that's the plan. And to have that, then have those minor changes incorporated into the Greek New Testament, the UBS and the Nestle-Aland. So I'm going to pause there. I know many of you need to get on the road and other things, but is there any pressing question that you need to ask about this that I can either answer or act like I'm answering and defer because I don't know it? Yes, sir.
Can you share with us any good places where we can hear online?
Yes, in terms of listening to the Greek New Testament. My best recommendation for you in that is to go to the website ntgateway.com. Okay, this is run by a professor. He was at Duke University. I'm not sure if he still is. And he's this online portal for everything New Testament. And a subcategory of that is like the Greek New Testament. And a subcategory of that is audio versions related to the Greek New Testament. And it's been a while since I've been on there, but it has tons of links to all kinds of different, and I think you were in the class last week, and so you know there are people who are very passionate. Brother Ignacio, I know you were in the class last week, but I think we talked about some people are really passionate about modern Greek pronunciation versus reconstructed Koine versus Erasmian. So just be aware, you're wading into, if you wade into those audio sites, you're going to wade into people who, if you don't pronounce it this way, you're not really learning Greek, yeah, that kind of stuff. So some people. Okay, good question. Yes?
Could you give that link?
NT, like New Testament, ntgateway.com. But you're going to have to dig down in there, Greek New Testament, audio Greek New Testament, and then there'll be a bunch of links. ntgateway.com. Any other pressing question, testimony, question, word? Be happy to take anything.
What's your next book?
Well, Lord willing, I'm working on a beginning Greek grammar with Ben Merkel. Right, that's happening right now, and we hope to have that done by the summer. But it probably won't come out for another year after that. And then I'm working on a book of essays related to interpreting the Bible. I'm working on. I'm lined up to do some commentary work on. I don't want to say it because I don't want people to ask me about it later, because I'll feel bad that it's not done. But I've got, but the beginning grammar is kind of on the front burner. If the Lord gives me life and strength, I'll continue to do that, and I'm grateful for His kindness. I do want to plug, along with Dylan, that you go see the English Bibles here. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of English Bibles earliest English Bibles are over there, ones that you can turn the page and touch. And Nathan Parsons is hosting that, and he's very skilled. I went to it this morning. I went from about 9 to 10 o'clock, and he tells the stories of people who died so that we could do what we're doing here today, read the Bible in English and be able to have the freedom to do this. At one time it was a capital offense. You were put to death for having and reading the Bible in English. So we just need to be grateful for the freedom that we have, and encourage you to check that out. I'm going to pray for us. And then I'm going to be hanging around here if you want to chat with me a few minutes. I'm happy to answer a question personally. Thank you for coming. We're so glad that you came, both alumni, current students, people who've never been here before. We're so glad to host you on campus. And let's ask the Lord's blessing as we leave here. Oh God, we thank you for just the wonderful privilege we have, the freedom we have to talk about your word, to read your word, and what a great privilege we have to read it in the original language, to savor, soak in the words of the apostles and prophets. God, I thank you for these men and women here and their presence as a commitment and desire on their part to be people who are as close to your inspired words as they can possibly be, and so that they might know you, the true and living God, to trust in your Son, His death for them, His life for them fully, that they know that they're accepted by you because of Christ, and to live empowered by your Spirit, that we might be a bright light in this dark world. God, I pray that you might be merciful to us as we travel by plane and by car and other ways. God, I pray that everyone will arrive home safely. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.